Welcome everyone to our Community Council Chairs meeting. We have a few people, it looks like, who are new. Glad to see you. So we'll do some quick introductions, and I'll ask you to use the mics. It just helps in these beautiful tall ceiling rooms. Our voices escape into the upper atmosphere of the room. So please use them unless you really want to scream. But also it helps with the recording because you're on SLC TV. So you'll be watched by millions around the world in this meeting. But anyway, thank you all. I know I look forward to, and hopefully you as well, look forward to these meetings when we have a chance to share what's going on in our neighborhoods and share a few things in the city. So I'm just going to ask for some quick introductions as we go around.
Hi, I'm Mike Ely from the Sunnyside East Neighborhood Association.
I just took a bite of my taco. I'm Gwen Springmeyer. I'm not Marianne Wright. She couldn't be here today, and so I'm representing the Greater Avenues Community Council.
Lynn Pershing, Yale Crest Neighborhood Council.
Amy Berry, Sugar House Community Council.
Dennis Eyre, East Bench Community Council.
Darrell High, East Liberty Park.
Nate Salazar, East Central Community Council.
Dennis Ferris, Poplar Grove.
Joanne Anderson, Jordan Meadows.
Shauna Peck with Fair Park, also with Steve over here.
Michael Dodd with Wasatch Hollow Community Council.
Laurel Young with Foothill, Sunnyside.
Ellen Reddick, Bonneville Hills Community Council.
Brad Duncan, Bonneville Hills Community Council.
Steve Johnson, Fair Park.
Esther Hunter, East Central.
All right, thank you. And then why don't we just quickly introduce our Salt Lake City staff who are here.
I'm Julia School with Transportation. Sean Draper with Public Facilities.
Dan Stronach with Rose Park. We just didn't get a seat at the table.
Oh, hey, grab a seat. We've got seats. Come on up. Yeah, those of you who are here from the community councils, please join us up here at the table. We can add more chairs too if we need to. So.
Blake Perez, Rose Park Community Council.
Nora Shepard, Planning Director, Salt Lake City. Kuno Kumar, Mayor's Office. Sean McDonough, Mayor's Office, Community Liaison.
Michael Scott, Mayor's Office, Community Liaison.
Michelle Sagan, Refugee Liaison on the Community Relations.
Okay, thank you all. So really bring your chairs on up and join us. As we're getting going, I do want to introduce to you, sorry to interrupt you right in the middle of eating there, Nora, but our new planning director, you don't have a presentation, I don't think, today, but I know all of you will want to know and will be working closely with Nora. Nora comes to us with a distinguished planning career, both in Utah and other places, and I can tell you we're thrilled to have her join us in the city. She knows our area well and knows planning exceptionally well, and I think you'll enjoy working with her, as I know those of you who've had a chance so far have had that really good experience. So and she's going to give you all of her personal contact information, so you can contact her at any time. Her direct contact information. So anyway, please help us welcome Nora to our Salt Lake City family.
My Boston cards, I can get, I'll go upstairs and get some more of them because I didn't drink enough. But it's really a pleasure to be here. I absolutely love being back in Utah. I spent 25 years up in Summit County, raised my kids up there, and then about 7 years ago, I moved to New Jersey, got married, was a Jersey girl for a while. I love not having to pump my own gas. That was the best thing about it. And then my husband retired, and so we moved back, and it's just all fell into place perfectly, and it's been fabulous. I'm really happy to be back in Utah, and happy to be with Salt Lake City. We've got a great department. I have a real open door policy. I'd be willing to go to lunch with any of you, or coffee, or whatever. But I'm looking forward to getting to know you better.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. So a few quick announcements, and then as usual for these agendas, those of you who are new, we're going to have some fairly brief, just presentations on some matters of city-wide significance that we think may be of interest to you, and that you obviously may want to share within your community councils. And if you want some special presentations to your community councils on these items, we'll be happy to do that as well. But let me start with some quick announcements. You have, I think, before you, or am I just passing these around? I'm passing these around? I am passing around for your look and then return. Our neighborhood cleanup schedule for the year. And people go, why don't we just put all this out on the website? The reason is because we have found what happens is people around the city get hold of the locations for where cleanup is happening, and if they miss it in their neighborhood, or it's more convenient for them to go put their stuff out front on a neighborhood cleanup in another neighborhood, it tends to impose substantially on other neighborhoods. So we will be announcing those as the sequence occurs, but for your benefit, I'll pass these out in each direction, and then if you would return them to us, this is the schedule, so you can take note of it for your neighborhood and make announcements as soon as you would like. I also want to particularly recognize Joanne. Joanne, so thank you. She has taken the special initiative, which we appreciate, to reach out in the Jordan Meadows community to provide for translation of the community council meetings in Spanish. And I think it has helped, as I understand, and bring more people to your community council who may have language troubles, and thereby have some challenges in even participating. It's a great thing to do, so I want to make the rest of you aware of that, and appreciate you taking that extra effort, Joanne, to kind of reach out into your neighborhood there. We are also looking at ways, and I don't know if this will happen, but I'll just mention this to you, of ways that we can make the translation into Spanish. That's by far our largest minority population in Salt Lake, that we can make available translation services in a way that makes it easier in your community councils as well. So we're going to be looking into that, I think, as we go through development of the budget this year. So anyway, thank you, Joanne, for moving ahead with that. Yeah, please.
We have found that the most important part is to maybe have a secretary or a person that can put your agenda together in Spanish and English. And it's worked out wonderful. And then at different times we have a translator. Thank you.
Great, Joanne. Thank you for taking the initiative on that. So I'll mention next that we are going to get two brief presentations. One is on our transit master plan, why we're doing it, what we're doing. It's something that the City Council and we have been pursuing and where we are with it, so you'll know for your area and participation. And then we're going to have a presentation on Mountain Accord, which is this major effort going on in the mountains. I'll explain when we get to that point. So Julianne, I know you're here to give us a briefing on that.
Will everyone be able to hear me if I stand up here and just talk about it?
Can you pick it up on the mics too? Or
Just point the mic at her.
why don't you just bring this close?
That's fine. Will that work? That should be good.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk about our transit master plan. This has been something we've been building up to for a long time. I'm going to talk about it very, very briefly, and I'll leave you some information so you can learn more in case you don't hear enough today. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the history and background. For a couple of years, we've been building up to this process. Then I'm just going to talk about the process itself and the schedule, including when we'll be touching base with you throughout the process. I'm going to do a review of the council goals. These are things that they developed specific to transit in Salt Lake City, and then take some questions and talk about next steps. This is a whole collection of plans. We have a long and rich history of planning in our state and region and city. And so we are going to take the information that we've already gathered, and rather than duplicating it, we're going to use it, we're going to build upon it, we're going to kind of knit together
those plans as we develop this plan. So the background on this is that in September of 2013, City Council developed the goals for transit that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. Then in February, the scope of work for the plan, so a consultant scope of work, was adopted by council. We then advertised competitively for a consultant team, and then brought a great team on board. They have a lot of specific experience working with city transit master plans. It's an unusual thing that's become more popular. Thank you. Wow. Now I'm loud. It's something that's become more popular in communities to meet local needs. Transit agencies typically are focused on regional needs, and those are important, especially in Salt Lake City, but we also are thinking about our own residents and workers and how they get around within the city. Our consultant team has a lot of experience doing that in other places, so we're very excited to have that expertise on board.
Who did you say the team is?
Nelson Nygaard, out of their San Francisco office. And so in January 2015, we officially began the process. We're collecting data and so forth, and getting ready to roll some initial things out soon. This is just a quick overview of the process itself. What I want to emphasize here is that community input is throughout the process. We really feel like it has to feed into each step in the process. So right now, I mentioned we're gathering data. We'll develop criteria that help us prioritize for the plan. And it will help us know how to kind of screen out the different options that we have, decide what's really important to us. We'll identify some corridors, develop alternatives, and this will include things like amenitizing corridors for bus, improving service levels. So it's not just about capital investments, it's really about bus, rail, how the whole thing works together, transfers, et cetera. And then we'll pull this all together into a transit master plan. We've just finished developing a public involvement plan. It includes a whole bunch of elements. You can see there's a lot of social media and online opportunities to participate. We'll do one traditional public meeting. All the rest of our in-person outreach is going to be mobile. So we're very excited. We're working now on a plan to brand the Jingle Bus so that we can go visit places. We've done a lot of outreach in the community to things like Arts Festival, for example, but in this case, we're really targeting it to not only go to events where we'll encounter a lot of people, but also to specific parts of the community where people might have a hard time getting to us. So elderly populations, disabled folks, and this bus tour will help us to do that. The three primary goals for our outreach are involving, educating, and listening. And so those are things that we're going to try and do throughout the process, really the whole way through. We will have a couple of key milestones, and I'll talk about those. So this is our schedule. We have 7 tasks that are involved in the plan, and you can see that public involvement runs throughout, but you see those 3 dots. And those 3 dots represent when we'll hit significant points in the planning process where we have information to share and where we need to hear from you. And so right now we've just received our first draft of the existing conditions report. That tells us what's on the ground today, where are people traveling, how well matched is the existing transit system to the way that people are traveling in our city. We're now reviewing that, and we'll finalize it, and we'll come up with some key themes. That will be when we come back, and also ground truth some of that information and hear from you. Does the data match what you're experiencing with the transit system? When we have some key themes out of the existing conditions report as well as the public input, then we'll start developing goals based on those themes. And we'll come back to verify that we're getting those right so that the criteria we develop is consistent with the values of the community. And then finally, we'll come out with our initial findings and draft recommendations. This will all be prior to making a formal recommendation for a draft plan, and so then there will be another touch point again after that, that City Council will be able to engage the community. These are the transit goals that Council developed. We actually added one as of Tuesday evening, so there were 6, now there are 7. Ease of use. This is a lot about transfers. We've had a lot of new transfers be introduced into the system with our new rail lines and adjustments to bus service based on that. We want to minimize those because it makes travel time long and it makes it kind of clunky to make a trip. Affordability is a big thing. There's been a lot of talk of distance-based fares, and as you are probably all aware, we've had our Hive Pass pilot program, and we're hoping to launch sort of the 2.0 version of that soon. Destinations, so access to transit routes that are within a quarter of a mile of where you live, that can take you to major destinations in the city. And a span of service that's not just about the regional commute, the morning and evening peak, but rather all-day service where it's called for. Immediacy, Council has said that 10-minute service is a high priority. While that would be very expensive to do, we need to look at what that would mean. And 10-minute service is definitely something that I would love to have available to me. Right now, the top frequency is 15 minutes, and in some places, that's not quite enough. Route reliability, we have a lot of changes to our transit system, and so this seeks to minimize the number of times. 3 times a year, we change transit service in our city. And then finally, passenger amenities was added to the list, and this is just about shelters and lighting and things that make it a dignified experience to wait for your vehicle to arrive. So now I just have questions, mainly about how you'd like to be involved, and I can tell you we're happy to visit any of your meetings, and we will share with you all of the information that we share with City Council. This presentation is exactly what our City Council heard the other night, and but we can really kind of take the temperature of your particular neighborhood if you feel like your neighborhood has a real interest in this topic and has things to share with us that might not be obvious just from data alone. So we're happy to visit at any time. If you look on the back of the sheet that's going around right now, you will see a website at the bottom. And if you go to that link, that brings you to our city's transit section or transit master plan section of our city's website. We're also going to be launching a website shortly, in just a couple of weeks, that's specific to this plan. And we'll have that very live and active and dynamic throughout the process. It'll be a place to get information. For instance, where our mobile tours will be located. And it will also give you opportunities to provide input, take surveys, and so on and so forth.
Julianne, thank you. I might just add one other dimension to this. The legislature, which just adjourned a week or so ago, 10 days ago now, how quickly we forget those 45 days, passed one major piece of legislation relating to local transportation funding that included 2 pieces. One of it will increase the gas tax by 5 cents beginning January 1st, and they will also convert the gas tax to a sales tax on gas, which has the effect of allowing revenues to increase with inflation, to be indexed with the price of gas. There's all kinds of sort of limitations or restrictions on how that works, but still it will really provide, in the case of the gas tax, a little bit of a catch-up in terms of what's happened with transportation funding at the local level from the gas tax, which from the last time it was raised in 1997, it's at 40% of the value that it was in 1997. So that was a pretty significant piece that will come into play beginning January 1st. It can be only used for roads. The gas tax is constitutionally dedicated to roads, but nevertheless can help make a big difference in terms of the city's transportation funding. The other piece of the legislation is a quarter-cent sales tax increase subject to being placed on the ballot and approval by the voters. It is designated that it be split for counties like Salt Lake County, where we have transit service, where 1/10 of the cent goes to cities, 1/10 of a cent goes to transit, and then 0.05 of a cent goes to county. So that is the kind of distribution of that sales tax money if and when it is brought to approval by the voters in a county. For Salt Lake City, that could be obviously very substantial in terms of increasing our transportation funding, and it has to be used for transportation. But I bring it up particularly as it relates to the transit plan because it explicitly recognizes that the city and county funds can be used for active transportation, pedestrians and bicycles, and transit. So we will be looking, and we obviously, this is something that just passed and haven't had any significant discussions with the council about this, but we'll be having discussions going forward that if this quarter cent comes through, and then with the additional revenues from the gas tax increase, but particularly as it relates to the sales tax piece of this, how do we want to try to allocate that money? I mean, I think our sense in the city is we need to continue to maintain our roads and obviously make improvements there. But the greatest shortcoming I think we feel, and we've had many discussions about this as a city, both with the city council, is that our greatest shortcoming today is around transit. That the lack of transit service in this city hampers the ability of people who want to be able to access and use transit and make that a real option for people as a way to get around. So that will be part of an ongoing debate. Certainly we will invite you to participate in as well, if and when certainly it unfolds. But it can play in very much in terms of what we end up being able to do with transit, because right now UTA revenues are so limited that it restricts enormously what they're able to do in terms of transit service. Their operational monies just don't come close to meeting what the needs are in our city or really anywhere else along the Wasatch Front where they have service. So we're going to be looking at that closely and how we might, if something moves forward for UTA in terms of funding, how we might look at use of their funds and maybe also use of city funds to make improvements in that area. So I bring that to your attention, but other questions you may have for Julianne as it relates to the transit plan, and let's not keep this to specific areas you want to see improvements. That will obviously come through the process, but just in terms of how this plan might unfold and participation.
Do you have any idea on time frame to vote, time frame to actual reality?
Oh, this is for the transit. So I know it's been discussed, but there is no time frame set. My guess is it could be put on as early as this year as a countywide vote. One of the challenges is this is not a countywide election year. It's a municipal election year, but not a countywide. So there are some complications and additional costs associated with holding an election this year. Plus, I think there are questions about preparing for a ballot initiative and getting the county council to consider it and put it on the ballot. So I don't know if it'll be this year or, in all likelihood, it'll be in the next 2 years, though, if it's not this year. I think there's general recognition that we want to bring this to the voters to decide whether or not we make improvements in our transportation systems.
Thanks.
Esther.
One of the things that I've been noticing, especially with the 5 Pass, is that part of it is converting people who don't use transit now to transit. Is there any thought to have kind of a marketing component to this that really
with the Hive Pass?
encourages that? I'm thinking if it weren't for an application like Here Transit that I found on my smartphone, I would not be able to use transit, but because of that application, I can go everywhere and within quick minutes.
Yes, the answer to that is yes. We are looking at those things, and so when we talk about passenger amenities, it's not just about being at a stop, but also about how legible is the system? Can you use it? Can you find your way? Can you pay for it easily, et cetera? And that's very intimidating for the new user, I think, in particular. So yes, we are looking at that, and what are the barriers? I find the trip planner, the UTA trip planner, pretty clunky to use myself, and so we will be looking at how we can better inform our citizens about what's available in our city.
So those of you who use mobile apps, there's actually the Salt Lake City mobile app provides sort of great access. The UTA website and apps are pretty feeble, I would say, by today's standards, and they recognize that. I think they're putting a big chunk of money in their approved budget now this year to upgrading their web-based and app services, so hopefully that will help.
Hopefully our plan can make recommendations a little for how they do that, but I know they do have that in their plans. Yeah.
So along the lines of the amenities, one of the things I'm noticing on transit, and it's partly due to frequency and distance, the slots for bicycles are full. So I've been stuck at a bus stop and I had to wait another 30 minutes for the next bus because there's not enough spaces for bicycles, and that's becoming an integral part of transit as well. And so I would hope that maybe we look at how inclusive amenities that's kind of addressing those multiple modes of transit that are linking. You can deal with excess bicycles on the train better than the bus, but I've been stuck before.
I've had that happen myself, and yes, that is definitely something that I've heard about a lot. I understand why it's challenging to deal with it. I think where we're looking at routes maybe that have more passenger capacity than they need, we could maybe take some seats out and put in more bike racks, you know. But that's an issue that I hear about a lot and that I've experienced. It's frustrating. So.
And in my direct discussions with UTA, they are well aware of that too, and they have been planning, and I don't know, I keep hearing it's about to happen, so I don't want to give a timeline to it. I've been hearing for 2 years it's about to happen, but they are converting spaces on their train to bike rack holdings. It makes it a much more efficient use of the space on trains as well, so.
And we will, not as part of the Transit Master Plan, but as part of our ongoing work. So for instance, this year you'll see a bunch of improvements to bus stops on 200 South. We're going to add bike racks to that as a city, and so that's just work we have ongoing that irrespective of what the Transit Master Plan does, we recognize that if nothing else, you need to be able to lock your bike up, and hopefully you don't need it at the other end of your trip in those instances. Yeah.
I recently visited Seattle, and I was very impressed with the tap-on. With you can get a card, and then through your computer put money on it, so you don't get charges every time you want to use your card to get a ticket. And you can tap on and tap off, and that was really. We need to have that system. I know it's more expensive, but that would really simplify life. For
UTA actually rolled out a fare card that is like that. I don't know if it's as user-friendly quite as Seattle's, but I do know that they have that in place now. It's fairly new as of, I think, this year is when they rolled it out.
It's in place now. I mean, that's what I use. I just tap on and tap off. It's really slick, so, yeah.
The bus is where you can't do it. Not on all.
Actually, you can use, I use it on the bus.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe it's not on all their buses at this point, but yeah.
They do. They offer a 20% discount. And it does depend on the buses, so some have them, some don't. Yeah.
Other questions? So I'll tell you what, I know we could get going forever on this. Let's keep it purely to the process of the plan because we've got other presentations, and I want to leave most of the time, as we do, to our comments, questions that you may have relating to things going on in the neighborhoods.
Who is it from the city that's dealing with UTA, and who are you dealing with at UTA?
We are dealing with everyone from me to the general manager and others at UTA to all of our staff up and down the line working every day back and forth with UTA.
Quick question. Or not a question, but I know this lady that lives up on the avenues. She's probably close to 90. She's partially blind. She uses the transit everywhere. So, I mean, I can't believe that the rest of us can't do that. I mean, she can't read it. She doesn't have a phone. And when there's a new plan to the transit, her daughters take her and show her how to do it again. She has a daughter that lives in Logan, and she has one that lives in Provo. She goes all over the city, and she does not have a problem. I mean, she knows that, I mean, if you can imagine if you're that age and you can't see, and she goes, I just like to go. So anyway, that's something for you to think about.
Well, that's great. I mean, hats off to her, because I know a lot of people who don't have those challenges have a hard time using the system.
All right, thanks.
It was similar to the first question about how much of this is about UTA and how much of this is about independent of UTA, because it sounds like this is all UTA.
UTA is the transit service provider for Salt Lake City and everywhere on the Wasatch Front. That is not going to change. We work very, very closely with UTA to make sure they understand what our priorities are, to make sure we are adequately reflected in their region-wide system. I can tell you we harass them on a daily basis. I'm sure that's the way they look at it. But that is the way that our system is set up, and I can tell you when talking with mayors and city officials from other parts of the country, we are incredibly fortunate to have a region-wide transit service here. Because in places where it is split up, it is a disaster. Transit by its nature, as most of our transportation system, is regional in nature, and you need a regional service.
The question was, is this going to conflict with other plans in the valley? That there's a limited number of resources, and Salt Lake City identifies 10-minute service, whatever it is. Sandy identifies, I want 10-minute service.
There is always competition for very scarce resources in terms of transit. And I'll just tell you a thought that I've had that I've been talking to UTA, both board members and officials about. If a place like Salt Lake City places a higher priority on transit, and we are willing to use some of our revenues, our transportation revenues for transit, that be acknowledged in how UTA prioritizes use of some of its monies. And that stretches their dollars further and allows us potentially to get more service. So we'll see how that works, and whether or not they accept that in terms of a policy, sort of change your position for them. But if you've got other ideas, we're certainly open to it. And our city council, I can tell you, is very focused on this topic as well. Some have said, oh, we should just take over the transit service. I think as they're kind of learning what that would mean, they're not quite as excited about it. Okay, Julianne, thank you so much. Michael, did you want to add something?
Will this plan go into detail on location of rail, like streetcar?
It will. So it will identify the places that we need to connect and where there is demand and other reasons like development, redevelopment opportunities that would call for that. So that's where the key corridors come in. It will make suggestions about what the mode is. So, gee, this looks like it's bus, this looks like it's bus rapid transit, this looks like it's streetcar. And then detailed corridor studies would follow based on the priority of that corridor. So yes.
Yeah, this should get specific to neighborhoods, to modes of transit, all of that, so, right. One other, Nate.
So I knew that there were specific phases to things like the bus transit routes and the new streetcars. Are those still the same?
Yes, so we have some things that are identified in our regional plans already and that are phased. And we'll build upon that, and we'll get into a little bit of a finer grain for within the city itself. Most of the jobs in the region are here in Salt Lake, and so there's a big focus on getting people in and getting people out, but not as much on getting people around. This will look at the ways that happens and when those places might be ripe for increases in service or capital investments.
Okay, Julianne, thank you. So I know this is a great interest all across the city, and hope through your community councils you'll help us and help yourselves get everyone involved so we have a good outcome of that. And the timing, as it turns out, is going to be good. It's all in this year, which means as we anticipate some more transportation funding coming to the city and potentially to UTA, we should be in a very strong position to prioritize where those monies go. So next, and it's hard to do this as a quick presentation, so Laura Briefer is going to be on the spot here. We want to inform you a bit about something that we all have an enormous interest in, which is the future of the Wasatch Mountains here. Just as a quick kind of context for Laura's presentation here, some of you at least will recall that a few years ago, it's actually maybe closer to 4 years ago now, a proposal came from the Canyon Ski Resort over in Park City to have a lift to connect over the Big Cottonwood Canyon Ridge to Solitude. And we learned of the proposal when legislation was introduced in Congress to sell the corridor of public land, Forest Service land, to the ski resort to enable that to happen. I and others reacted with vehement opposition, testified at a hearing. The other thing that was happening is a hearing was held the week after it was announced the bill was being introduced, and opposed it. And coming out of that, I and others around the region said, look, this is ridiculous to see this kind of proposal and other proposals we were hearing about that would have huge impacts on our mountains without it being a locally driven decision-making process. So we established literally an effort that's now called Mountain Accord of getting literally every single player on the Wasatch Front and the Wasatch back, local governments, state governments, ski areas, environmental interests, property owners, and businesses involved in one process to see if we can come up with a solid long-term direction on the future of the Central Wasatch. We are now very far along in that process. We're in the tail end of some recommendations that have gone out for public review, and we want to make you aware of that, and we're encouraging a lot of public input. Laura is responsible for our Water Resources Division in our Department of Public Utilities, and Salt Lake City owns almost all the water. I mean, like 98+% of the water, of all the water coming out of the mountains here. And we provide water not only for Salt Lake City, but for about half of the valley. So for us, these mountains are critical because it is the dominant source of our water supply, and protecting those watersheds is critical to us. We have remarkably good water, particularly given the amount of use that occurs in these mountains, and so we're intent on protecting that going forward. But we also have, like for most folks in the valley, this is our backyard, and protecting our recreational access and mix of uses that people enjoy today and hopefully going into the future is of huge importance to us as well. And for many of us, it's very personal, but it's much more than that in terms of representing the city. So Laura's going to give you a brief update on what we're doing there, and obviously encourage you through your networks to help us try to make good decisions.
Right, and I think your agenda also has a brief update on our water supply situation. Is it still? I do have.
It says Mountain Accord and water update.
Okay, so I was going to just give you a brief update on our water supply situation in Salt Lake City and then launch into Mountain Accord. They're kind of related anyway, so. What I wanted to talk to you about is this coming year, what we're looking at with respect to water supplies. There have been a lot of newspaper articles about drought and snowpack and stream flow. So I thought I would bring it local and give you a sense of what it means to us here. Our main water sources, if you look at the pie chart here, just over the last 30 years, we average about 55% of our drinking water comes from those streams from the Wasatch Mountains, where we have a robust watershed protection and is the focus of the Mountain Accord process. About 35% comes from reservoir storage, which is also surface water from the Wasatch Mountains. So about 90% of our water supply comes from the Wasatch Mountains. And then 10% is groundwater sources. This proportion kind of changes up a little bit depending on the season. So if we have a really dry year like we have this year, we'll probably do a little bit more groundwater. Maybe 15% of our source of water will be groundwater. We might pull a little bit more from water storage from our reservoirs. But in general, that's sort of our makeup of where we get our water. We are constantly monitoring the environment of our water supply, both the built infrastructure and the natural infrastructure. This is just a little slide to show you some of the sources that we monitor, from the National Weather Service to the USDA Natural Resources Conservation System. We look at where we are on the drought monitor. Right now, most of Utah, all of Utah is in some form of drought. We look at the different reservoirs. Deer Creek is our reservoir, and it's at 95% right now, which is great for us. We look at snowpack, and over here you can see snowpack isn't looking so good. This orange zone shows us between 50 to 60% snowpack, normal snowpack. And then we look at our stream runoff projections that are put together by the Weather Service. And those are also well below average. So what does that mean for us? Of course, we've got below average snowpack and stream flows. Our reservoir storage is at really good capacity right now, and we have primary rights in those reservoirs, so we're looking good with respect to reservoir storage. Our groundwater supplies are very good. And it's important for you to know that this isn't our first drought. Salt Lake City has been planning since the early 1900s for long-term, multiple-year droughts, which is why we have our reservoir storage and groundwater rights. So we've planned for years that look like this. We have a lot of resiliency and redundancy in our storage. And as such, our water supplies look really good for us this year. We're not going to have any kind of mandatory conservation. We're not looking at a water shortage. But that said, our water conservation program is really important. Everything our communities do to use water wisely and efficiency is very important. We could be heading into another drought year. So as we have multiple drought years, we cycle down on our reservoir storage and have to have another wet year to build that up. So it's important to have that ethic of conservation. And we also have some exciting new tools for the public that we've just started rolling out. So I urge you guys to visit Salt Lake City or slcgardenwise.com. We're happy to come to your community councils and walk through that website with you. It gives you a lot of information about landscaping outdoors, from institutional to residential properties, what you can do, irrigation, when to plant things, when to water things, how much. It's a great interactive website. So we're happy to come to any of your community councils and talk about that with you. So I think maybe I'll go into Mountain Accord, and then if there are questions about either water supply or Mountain Accord, we can talk about that if that's okay. So Mayor Becker gave a really good summary of sort of the process on a whole at a high level. We have a big stake in this process because of our watersheds and our water resources, and we're very engaged in the process. It's a very collaborative process, so we work with at least 25 different federal, state, and local government entities, as well as nonprofit and private sector entities, to really understand what are the underlying interests and needs and values associated with this mountain range that is increasingly under a lot of pressure. So we've done a lot of work over the last year in terms of environmental baseline analyses, what are the future trend lines look like for our mountains in terms of the environment and recreation and use and development, and what are the big issues we're trying to resolve in the next 30, 40 years. So it's been a really exciting process. This is a map that's hard to see, but I wanted to point out that a lot of information is on the Mountain Accord website at mountainaccord.com. I pulled this map from the proposed blueprint document that's online. And what I wanted to point out here is the way the process was designed was in a very, it was a systems approach. And so we looked at the environmental system and the state of the environmental system, and we had a group of about 50 or 60 stakeholders say, what do they want to see that idealized environmental system? If we didn't have to consider anything else, what would that environmental system look like in the future? And water was a part of that environmental system. We also did the same thing with the recreation system. Again, we had stakeholders from all different types of recreational interests get together and say, if recreation was our only concern, what would that look like? We also did that with the economic systems. The Wasatch Mountains are actually very important in terms of economics to our region. We have commercial recreation like ski resorts, but we also have a backcountry recreation economy. So the group tried to define what that looked like and what the ideal future for that would be as well. And then transportation and transit. That was a very important issue too. And to step back a little bit, all of these issues, land use and environmental protection and recreation and transportation, since I've been working in the Wasatch Mountains for the last 12 years or so in various jobs, they've all come up sort of singularly in a silo. So I think about 2 years ago, we had a big mountain transportation study process where we looked at what transportation problems are involved in Big and Little Cottonwood Canyons and how we solve them. We pretty quickly learned in that transportation study, though, that if you try to solve a transportation problem, you might be creating unanticipated consequences in other parts of the system. You might be inducing development, for instance, because you're trying to move people as many people as possible from point A to point B as efficiently as possible, but not really thinking about how that impacts development or economic initiatives or where people recreate. And so the point of developing, sort of the systems approach was to take a look at, once we identify what is the ideal economic or environmental system look like, what does it look like when you combine them together? Where are the conflicts and where are the places where those agree? And we've identified conflicts in places where those agree and sat down and developed what's referred to now as the blueprint. So the blueprint is a set of actions or scenarios where we might resolve problems and create opportunities. Some of those actions and scenarios don't agree with each other. They may conflict. But right now what we want is public input as to how people feel about these actions and scenarios. So I think I'll leave it at that. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about our perspective. So out of these 25 different entities that are involved, we come to the table with intention and perspective. And when I look at the blueprint, there are a lot of positive actions to me. There are actions that protect our watersheds through widespread land preservation, actions that call for environmental restoration where we have areas within the Wasatch that need restoring. Governance and financing is a big deal for both the environment and the recreation side of things, where we want to find a way to manage the use and the environment long into the future as we have these different pressures ranging from increased recreation use, climate change, those types of things. And there's a certainty to these actions where we're calling for land preservation in a much more certain way, whether it's through conservation easements on private inholdings within the Wasatch or on more stringent federal land protections on the Forest Service lands within the Wasatch. So those are all positive. There are some areas in the blueprint where I feel like we need to have a lot of conditions. So actions involving major construction projects. If we're talking about big transit investment projects, or we're talking about other types of development that are part of the blueprint, we want to make sure that, we're okay evaluating that, but we want to make sure that in the evaluation there are priorities and criteria that, in my mind, protect our water resources, but in other people's mind, also other parts of the system. We're also concerned about recreational overuse in the watersheds. So, it's not just about getting as many people to a destination to recreate in the watershed as possible. How can we use transit or other tools to manage it so we don't love these areas to death? And then again, concerns about inducing more development in the watersheds. I think with the land protection pieces, that probably won't be an issue, but as we talk about making big investments in other areas in transportation and economy, we want to make sure that that's not having a consequence of inviting more development pressure within the watershed areas. So where we are right now, we're in a public input part of the process where we have this blueprint of a whole bunch of proposed actions or alternatives on the table for you to criticize and say what you like, say what you don't like, say what you'd rather see. And we've had a lot of public input so far, both in public meetings, one-on-one conversations. I've met a lot with our constituents just in a one-on-one scenario, and we're getting a really good idea of how people are viewing, how the public is viewing this, where they see the benefits of the process, and where they see areas that we need to expand or revise or refine. So I think there's an opportunity for the community councils, if there's any desire at the community council level for us to come and talk and listen, that would be helpful. That would be very helpful for us, I think, in getting our public feedback. So I think that's it. Any questions?
Questions for Laura about what's going on, or you might keep that. If those of you who wanted to, the website is mountainaccord.com, so you might be particularly aware of that and direct people to that. There's, I think, links to the full blueprint, a lot of background information, a lot of reports, a lot of other information that's been developed and efforts that have been developed along the way. So, hey.
How have the public meetings been going, and when is the next one?
The next public meeting hasn't been planned yet, but we'll be advertising that heavily when it is. The public meetings so far have been really well attended. We've had some really big ones in Park City, the town of Alta, and then the Salt Lake Valley area. So the scope of the project includes Summit County, Salt Lake County. So we're trying to get comment through a broad region as well, which is why we have some of our meetings in Summit County. But we will definitely, and I'll have some cards here too.
So when is the comment deadline? And it's April, or is it already passed?
So initially the comment deadline was March 16th, but we had so much public input and so much request for additional time that it's been extended, but the new date hasn't yet been set. We think it'll be sometime in May or June. That said, the earlier you get comments in, the better, because we have a big team of folks working on really integrating those comments into revisions and refinements to the blueprint. And so the earlier the better.
Any other questions, comments from folks? Thank you, Laura. Nice
Thank
job,
you.
and we encourage everyone to get involved. This is potentially a really once-in-a-generation kind of opportunity for us to provide some direction for the future of the Wasatch, for our part of the Wasatch here, and we may or may not be able to reach consensus, but that is our goal. So thanks. Now let's open up. We've got another 25 minutes or here, so just comments that you have, questions you may have about either things going on in your neighborhoods that you want to share or discuss with others here, or questions you have about things going on in the city that we may be able to answer.
I'd like to first applaud the City Council on their recommended plans for Salt Lake City Golf. I know my neighborhood would highly encourage the administration to follow through with their proposed plans. My question, Mr. Mayor, is we've all heard about... Check. We've all heard about the Prison Relocation Committee, or the prison relocation. I'm sure you've been answering a lot. I've read your statement. I'm interested to know why all of a sudden this came at the end of the legislative session, why this was not thrown out there during the process in December about with the increased sales tax. And I mean, it's geared specifically towards the city's goals. I'd love to hear your comments on that.
Yeah, thank you. So those of you who haven't been necessarily following this that closely, last fall or early winter, I don't remember the exact time frame, as I think most of you know, there was a prison relocation commission that identified, I think, 5 sites for potential relocation of the prison. A decision was made last year by the legislature to move the prison from Draper. So they were looking at sites across the state. They identified 5 sites. 2 of them were in Salt Lake City. One of them just kind of north and east of the airport, over by the News Regional Sports Complex area, a little bit closer to the lake. The other one west of the International Center and north of I-80 in the area kind of north of 7200 West. At that time, I and the City Council vehemently objected to the Salt Lake City sites, developed a 45-page report on the reasons those sites were terrible, provided sort of helpful direction, I think, with things like online petitions and protests and rallies around keeping Salt Lake City sites from consideration. Since that time, the Relocation Commission removed one of the sites, the one that's in the more in the Rose Park area, but has left on the 7200 West site, has also added 2 other sites, I think one in Tooele County, one in Utah County, but we are still very much on the list of potential sites. In the legislature, we were obviously very engaged, or tried to be very engaged, with the Prison Relocation Commission and with the legislation that was developed this year by the leadership of that commission to both transform the Relocation Commission into a development commission, but then also to look at financing for the prison site. I was approached by the chairs of the Relocation Commission, and they said, look, you're on the site as well as others. We want to know what your interests are if we were to select Salt Lake City for a site. From that moment on, I made very clear to them we are adamantly opposed to the site. We do not want this site in Salt Lake City, and we will continue in our strenuous opposition to Salt Lake City being selected as a site for the new prison. They then, in a second meeting, said, look, one of the things that we're thinking about doing is to provide an additional sales tax option for the community that is selected, whichever one. And we aren't making a decision during this legislative session and as part of this legislation on what site we're going to select. But we are thinking about ways to try to mitigate the impacts on whichever community is selected, recognizing that no community really wants the burden of a penitentiary for reasons we all can understand and appreciate here, I know. And so they reviewed with me that concept. They also asked, and out of respect for them, I appreciated they were willing to share confidence with me. They said, we want to share this idea with you, but we do not want this discussed at this point. First of all, we're not really sure what we're going to do with the legislation, but also we want to be able to manage our own process in terms of the decision making. So I respected their request, knew that they were considering putting this on. I didn't know if it was going to happen or how it was going to happen, but I certainly knew it was out there. And they, in their strategy for getting this legislation considered, moved it through the process and added as part of their financing plan, this half-cent sales tax community impact option for whichever site was selected. So it doesn't just apply to Salt Lake City, it's for whichever community ends up receiving the site. So I don't apologize for that. I hate the idea of a prison coming to Salt Lake City. They know it, they will continue to know it. We encourage others to express themselves. I did share it with the city council. I asked them if, I said, look, this is not something I want to know about alone. So I did share it with the city council and said, look, if you want, I will oppose and let them know that we oppose the idea of this potential local sales tax option. They said, well, just keep fighting. We'll keep fighting the prison, and you keep working on it. And for whichever community gets this, if there's some mitigation impacts, it would benefit not only Salt Lake City, but whichever city ends up being selected. So that's how I handled it, representing the city, and we saw what happened. And I'm going to continue to do everything I can, and I would ask others to certainly get involved in opposing the prison. If we do end up getting selected for a site, which hopefully won't happen, it'll be an option that's available for Salt Lake City as a potential revenue source going forward.
How long was this, did the legislator dangle this carrot out there?
Oh, I learned about it, I'm going to guess about halfway through. They have 45-day sessions, so I'm going to guess there was about 3 weeks left in the session. When they called and said, hey, we want to come up and talk to you. I assume they may have also talked to some of the other communities. I just don't know. All I know is they reached out to me and asked that we keep our discussion in confidence. And you know, I'm a former legislator, as all of you know. I know how the process works, and I wanted to be respectful of their wishes, or tell them don't talk to me about this at all. And I would far prefer to be included in their conversations. And as far as I know, until the very end of the session, or very close to the last couple of days of the session, this, other than with their leadership, this wasn't shared with their overall caucuses. And I know our Salt Lake City legislators, I've talked to most of them now, are rightfully really upset that they didn't know about it. And I don't blame them. As a former state legislator, I would have felt the same way.
Do any of them sit on the prison relocation committee?
We had some, well, we didn't have anyone who was a Salt Lake City legislator. Mayor McAdams was on the relocation commission. I think going forward, as I understand, I remember reading the legislation the last night of the session as it was kind of moving through, and it was appearing, and it did, as too often happens at the legislature, stuff comes in very late, they move it through the process quickly if they want to, and that's the way it works. I remember literally that last night of the session pulling up the bill and reading it, and I think in the new commission that replaces the relocation commission, there are legislators from both majority and minority parties. So I think we will have someone from Salt Lake City, or certainly from the Salt Lake area, as part of the commission going forward. And the timetable I've heard from them, whether they follow us or not, we'll see, is they will make a citing recommendation to the legislature that would be considered in a special session sometime midsummer. And then it would be up to the state legislature to make a decision and for the governor to approve decision for whichever site they select. So encourage you all to weigh in, as I will continue to. Any other comments, questions, other items? Yeah.
I'd like to talk about neighborhood crime.
Thank you.
I think I speak for a number of us around the table here that we are very, very concerned about the increase in crime in our neighborhoods. And I think we are also somewhat disappointed in the response of the police department, not only to our calls, but also for more information regarding the crime in our areas. And I think it would be well, I don't want to take up all the time for comments today, but I think it would be well if you would consider placing this on your agenda for maybe one of your next two meetings, where we could go around the table and we could exchange information as to what we think is happening in our neighborhoods, and maybe possibly how we could work on it together. And it may be something you might want to have the chief of police attend.
Great, thank you. We will look to put that on the agenda for our next meeting, if everyone's agreeable to that. So as I used to attend community council meetings very regularly. Now there are only 23 of you, or maybe there are more now. I think 23 is the last number I heard, community council, so I don't get around to all of you every year or all the time. But it used to be that with the community councils, there would be monthly reports of crimes in the neighborhood, and it was, as I understand that, continues, but isn't necessarily in a format that's easy to follow. So if that is the case, I think that's something we really want to try to make sure you get that information. I can tell you that one of the things that's happened while I have been mayor, even with the downturn in the economy, is for the first time in a long, long time, we have a full police force staffing. So we have been, even through the recession, we have been increasing our police force. And our police chief would tell you, and we'll have him come and give you and answer questions in a lot more specificity than I can, that crime has actually been going down across the city. And this is a national trend, even through the recession, which is really unusual when there are tough economic crimes. We have waves of crime, and it tends to be very localized throughout the city in different locations. I know in my neighborhood, we've had a wave pretty recently, and our neighborhood is very attentive these days to kind of paying attention to who's moving through the neighborhood and trying to help each of us kind of keep an eye out for each other in the neighborhood and respond. But let's set that up, if it's okay, where you can get a lot more and better information than I can give you, and tailored maybe to your community. And I'll ask our community liaisons, Mike and Sean, if you want to add anything to that in terms of anything that you see that we might want to do for a future meeting.
We could perhaps have the chief Lobate come and talk about, is it primarily the statistics that
Well,
response?
that's one of the areas, but we often hear also people from the police department complaining about things we requested that they don't have the manpower to do it. Okay, so while you may be fully staffed, maybe you don't have the people to do all the things that need to be done.
That may be, and we're happy to sort of look at that. And this is a good time to look at it, probably, because we're in the middle of a budget cycle for our development of our budget and recommendations to the council. There's always competition for how city revenues get allocated. I'll tell you that the police department is far and away the largest department in the city. And whether it's enough or not is obviously something that I certainly in the council can take a look at on whether or not that gets to be enhanced. We have more police officers today than we have ever had by far. And crime has been going down a bit. So, I'm not sure how all those pieces fit together, but it's really worthy of a lot of discussion. So we'll have Chief Burbank here, assuming he can fit it in his schedule next time. If not, we'll have someone else from the department. Please.
Okay, I'm sure that all of you have your detectives at your community councils. If not, you need one. This is what Detective Chris Johnson sent email to me. And it's about 4 or 5 pages. I mean, this is District 1. And this is what we got. He didn't, he sent it to us. And it's wonderful. And then also, if you don't get on your email, you get a report every day, maybe a couple of times a day, from the police department telling you what's going on in your neighborhood if you need to identify somebody. It's all through email. This gets sent clear through Jordan Meadows Community Council people. So, and this is, like I said, if you're not getting this, then this is something that you can. And then he also gave us a website that you can go in and look at all this yourself daily. So anyway, this is...
Yeah, so if you're not getting it, let's make sure you touch base with the liaisons, because maybe it's going to the wrong person. I know we try to do a good job of keeping our information about contacts up to date, but if for some reason you're not getting it in your community council, the chair or someone else you want to designate, let us know on that, and we'll try to make sure you get it. Please.
Along those same lines, she mentioned the detective that comes to our community council meeting monthly. And at Wasatch Hollow, we haven't had the same officer show up for, I think, since Detective Olson moved on. And it makes it really hard to build a rapport and a sense of community when every month we have to kind of start from scratch with a new officer. So I was wondering, it seems like, I forget what they're called now. They used to be the CAT teams, and now they're the CI or community involvement or something like that. But it seems to be more of a transitional place for officers rather than a place where they can stay and work with the community.
I think that's a really good point. I don't know if that's happening across the city, but I also know from the work that I've been involved in nationally and discussions about community police relations that one of the huge keys is to have police officers who are dedicated to a neighborhood, who get to know the neighborhood, and build up the relationships that form the trust that make community policing effective. And I know that Chief Burbank is very attuned to that. We've appeared together on panels and in discussions, and he's very cognizant of that. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but I think that's really something worthwhile bringing forward to the chief and seeing if there either need to be some adjustments made or what the reasons are why either in your neighborhood or across the city that's happening more than it should. Yeah.
I was just going to say my understanding is that most of the community detectives are kind of on a path to become sergeant. So it crossed my mind when you say that you're at full staffing. I don't know if they were just pulling people up to fill some new positions, but it is like you become a community intelligence officer, and then that's part of becoming a sergeant. So.
Okay. Well, let's talk about that with Chief Burbank when he's able to join us. I want to make sure there are others who maybe haven't had a chance to speak on this topic first. Nate, did you have your hand up on that?
Yeah, it was similar to this topic. It was around the use of force conversation that have been taking place. I just want to applaud yours and Chief Burbank's efforts to acknowledge the concern that the community has, for one. And secondly, what's your perception on the feedback that the community is giving, and are there any timelines for more dialogue to take place in the community?
So we've had 3 dialogues around community and use of force by the police. They've been really well attended and great dialogue, so thank you for that, Nate. We have been consolidating and summarizing all of the comment and results of the discussions that are coming forward. I don't know, I'm not aware that we're planning other additional dialogues. I think our next steps, as I recall, are to take that information, review it, and then develop some recommendations for either changes in policy or protocols with the police or training or the whole variety of things. And some of it may involve just what you brought up in terms of having police officers who are assigned to an area maybe spend more time there. I don't know. We'll see what comes out of those dialogues specifically, but I know that as soon as we have some of that consolidated and some ideas, I'm sure it's going to be shared and we'll ask for additional input. But I'm not aware of additional public meetings planned at this point. Is anyone? Poonam, do you want to comment on that?
On that same topic, at our last community council meeting, our detective, as a means of addressing that, brought and demonstrated a number of the implements that they use for non-lethal force.
Hopefully he didn't use lethal force at the meeting, or she?
He offered to test a taser on me, and I declined when I saw those wires.
Yeah.
But it was very well received. It was appreciated by the residents, and there were 50 people there. So.
Great. Well, I know that our police officers would certainly welcome an invitation if you want to have a similar kind of discussion or presentation in your council meeting. So, other topics, other points people want to make? Well, if not, thank you. Oh, Joan, please.
I mean, not to use all your time, but if you're not getting this, okay, you ask, and then you send an email to Chief Kirk Cook, and it happens. And then if you're not getting this, you send an email to Chief Burbank. I mean, your community councils, you represent your whole community, and the mayor's always behind us. So, make yourself known. Sorry. Anyway, thank you, Mayor.
No, that's right. Thanks. I mean, we try, I can tell you, we have been absolutely committed, certainly in my time, to having as open, transparent a city as we can. And we've had throughout the city, from top to bottom, a whole revamping of both the way our information is available and how it's available, and expanding the availability of information. But then also in how we conduct our community engagement to try to maximize public input into city decision making and into what we're doing in the city. And we welcome your suggestions on that. I mean, we now have training and guides for every city employee who gets involved with the public on what our expectations are and how to have an effective public engagement process. And we're continually working with our city employees to try to improve that part of city government. So, but thank you, Joanne, for that. Anything else? Well, Joanne, okay.
I just want to thank your employees. I mean, I've never called or whatever without getting the utmost help with anything I need. And I'm a real detailed person, so I mean, they bend over backwards to help me, and I so appreciate that and appreciate all the help that you give us.
Joanne, thank you. Well, on that happy note, positive note, thank you. Thank you all for coming. We'll look forward to the next meeting, and if you have some other ideas for things, we'll certainly plan on trying to get Chief Burbank here. Please let us know, and stay tuned. There is much more to come out of Salt Lake City.